Several federal crimes here at issue. When news breaks, tune to MSNBC.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov facing off against Ukraine and the West at the UN Security Council meeting today after Putin's threat of a nuclear response to his battlefield losses. Above their heads, this painting meant to symbolize peace and the world rebuilding itself after war. A pretty intense juxtaposition as Putin escalates his invasion of Ukraine, calling up 300,000 reservists to join the fight, which has sparked not just the largest wave of demonstrations since the war began across Russia, but one-way flights out of Russia to neighboring countries have sold out since Putin's announcement. And amid this mobilization, Secretary Blinken taking the opportunity today to remind the world that only one person has the power to end this brutal war.
One man chose this war. One man can end it. Because if Russia stops fighting, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends.
I want to bring in State Department spokesman Ned Price. Good to see you, Ned. Look, how seriously is the administration taking Putin's nuclear threats? And beyond what we heard from the president responding to him yesterday, what can and is the U.S. and its allies doing as a potential deterrent?
Good to see you too, Chris. And of course, we're concerned. This is a concern that we don't take lightly. It's something we're discussing with our allies and partners, including here this week at the United Nations. Look, we have seen any number of signs of failure and weakness on the part of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. You mentioned a couple of them. President Putin this week called for a partial mobilization of 300,000 more Russian citizens potentially to fight and die inside Ukraine, as so many of their compatriots have the sham referenda that apparently are slated for the coming days inside of Ukraine. And then, of course, today, you heard those powerful words from Secretary Blinken inside the council. Foreign Minister Lavrov also sent a very powerful signal, just, I'm sure, not in the way he intended. He couldn't bear to be there. As other foreign ministers condemned Russia's aggression, he showed up right before he took the mic, and he left right after his remarks ended. It is quite remarkable that President Putin has the temerity to call up hundreds of thousands of more Russians to serve as potential cannon fodder inside of Ukraine, and yet the Russian foreign minister can't even bear to listen to criticism from foreign ministers from around the world. If that isn't a sign of weakness, Chris, I don't know what is.
Well, a lot of people look at this as Putin being backed into a corner. And in the New York Times this morning, Roger Cohen, one of many people, by the way, who argue this, argues that a cornered Vladimir Putin is a dangerous Vladimir Putin. Let me read part of what he wrote today, Ned. 7 months into the war, its resolution appears more distant than ever, and its reverberations more dangerous. Perhaps not since the Cuban Missile Crisis 6 decades ago have American and Russian leaders confronted each other so explicitly and sharply on the danger of nuclear war. Does the U.S. see Putin as being backed into a corner, feeling backed into a corner, and does that make him more dangerous?
Well, Chris, this isn't a corner for one simple reason. There is an off-ramp for Vladimir Putin. We have to remember that Vladimir Putin, as the Secretary said today, chose this war. Vladimir Putin can choose to end this war. He could do that today. He could do that tomorrow. Today in the UN Security Council chamber, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, reiterated what we've heard from President Zelensky repeatedly, namely that Ukraine is prepared for diplomacy. The United States is prepared to support that diplomacy. A number of allies and partners around the world have been doing what they can to encourage that diplomacy. Putin and the Russian Federation has not yet shown any indication or willingness to engage in good faith diplomacy. So our task, in the meantime, is to do what has demonstrably worked. That is to continue to provide our Ukrainian partners with defensive security assistance, billions of dollars. We provided $15.1 billion since the start of this invasion alone. We'll continue to do that because it has worked. It has allowed our Ukrainian partners to wrest back territory that the Russians had taken from them. Dozens of countries around the world are doing the same. And on the other side of that equation, we're going to continue to mount sanctions and other economic costs on the Russian Federation. We're doing that so that if and when that negotiating table develops, and we hope it does, Ukraine will be in the strongest possible position to end this war, and to end this war on the terms that it sees fit.
So, look, nobody thinks that Vladimir Putin's just going to wave a white flag. So, to your point of sitting down at a negotiating table, what's the likelihood of that? What might that look like? And do you think that these protests we're seeing in Russia, the people seeming to flee the country, the domestic pressure, has any impact on Putin?
Well, it's really remarkable, Chris, to see what's going on inside Russia. We've seen this in recent months, including at the start of the invasion, and we're seeing it again now. Thousands of people across dozens of Russian cities are exercising their universal right to peaceful freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and even though they're not allowed to genuinely express their will at the ballot box, they are voting with their feet. Quite literally, airfare is sold out from Russia. Russian citizens are trying to flee rather than be conscripted and put into this war inside Ukraine. That itself is a very powerful symbol. Look, I think we have to be clear-eyed that the prospects for diplomacy in the very near term don't appear to be good. Again, Ukraine is prepared to sit down to engage in dialogue. Russia, on the other hand, is not. So until and unless Russia changes that orientation, we're going to continue doing what has worked, what has allowed, what has put our Ukrainian partners in a position to take back their sovereign territory that the Russians have had conquered in recent weeks and recent months.
Now, does the escalation from Putin push us further and further from reaching a deal for the return of Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner?
Chris, I think you have to remember that Trevor Reed, who had been held in Russia for months and months, a U.S. Marine, was freed during the course of Russia's invasion, Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So we are not going to let this stand in the way of our efforts to see the release of Paul Whelan, Brittany Griner. As you know, Chris, we put forward a substantial proposal to the Russian Federation a number of weeks ago now. We've engaged in direct discussions with the Russians about this proposal. We continue to urge them to take up this proposal so that we can bring Paul and Brittany home, reunite them with their families and their loved ones.
Let me ask you finally, the Treasury Department is imposing sanctions on Iran's essentially morality police for violence against Iranian women and those protesting there. What's the U.S. message to the women of Iran right now?
Our message to the women of Iran is precisely the same message I just delivered to the people of Russia. The women of Iran, the people of Russia, people around the world have universal rights. Among those universal rights are the right to peaceful assembly, the right to freedom of expression.
What did that sign say? Wow. Did you know that letting your hair blow in the wind is a crime in Iran? Wow.
Have universal rights. Among those universal rights are the right to peaceful assembly, the right to freedom of expression. We have seen those rights extinguished, in some cases violently, in some cases brutally, both in Russia and including recently in Iran with what is going on there. 7 people have been killed at least in the recent uprising. You're right that we continue to stand with them, but we also continue to take action. And today, not only did we sanction the so-called morality police, but 7 other individuals who have been complicit in some of the repression that we've seen on the part of the Iranian government. Unfortunately, Chris, this is par for the course in many ways from this regime to violently attempt to extinguish the exercise of those universal rights on the part of its citizens. But what we've seen from the people of Iran is what we've seen from the people of Russia. That spirit, that determination to peacefully exercise those rights can't be extinguished, and it won't be extinguished.
An incredibly intense time at the UN General Assembly, and we thank you for taking the time to talk to us. State Department spokesperson Ned Price, appreciate it. The tentacles of the January 6th investigation now reaching the wife of a sitting Supreme Court Justice, Ginny Thomas, set to appear before the 1-6 committee. So what can we expect from her testimony? You're watching Chris Janting Reports only on MSNBC.
The war situation goes beyond comprehension of why would a Goliath want to continue to bombard and attack little David simply because of old vendetta feelings of what occurred years and years and years ago. Obviously, there must be something else that's motivating poisonous Putin in him going this far in basically telling the world that they are willing to do whatever it takes, and that this is not a bluff in not only conquering Ukraine, but conquering the other entanglements that obviously has broiled to its boiling point pertaining to the original agreement that Ronald Reagan made during Gorbachev. This is not a loose cannon. This is a loose nuclear catastrophe that is right now brewing against the world. And if we don't watch, that's exactly what's going to happen. If the world does not put its foot down in letting this maniac know that if anything like this was to occur, he would be one of the #1 pariahs on the planet towards not just America turning against the Russians, but also the world in general. And it's really, really sad in what that their government is issuing out, and the consequences are going to be for all the people over in Russia to consequently go through. It's really going to be sad because of their poor leadership in now that has went astray in this way. Russia arrests over 1,300 as anti-war protests in that area. And I'm sure those numbers are way, way too low. And I'm sure if the truth be known, not only has people been arrested, but their brains has been knocked out. They've probably suffered brain damage, and some of them may have already been put to their deaths. I'm sure that some of them has been treated worse than animals, because these are those that are actually going up against that in which what their leader is pulling their whole society off into. It was just asked to me a while ago by a Vietnam veteran, looking at the exchanges towards what went on during the Nazi uprisings pertaining to Hitler poisoning and putting people to their deaths as far as putting them in gas chambers. The individual that I was talking to asked me, how can one human being deliberately want to bring that type of pain and suffering into individuals' lives, knowing what they're doing, that it is a evil, demonic deed? And my reply was to that individual, Mr. Woody, up in Kentucky. I said, Mr. Woody, I personally believe that they have been either brainwashed psychologically or that the devil has brought some sort of a bewitching spirit into that particular person or in that particular group of people, to the point that they're doing what they're doing, and their minds have been seared with a hot iron and been given over to a reprobate mind, and they actually either just don't care what they're doing, or they're taking privilege in bringing that type of suffering and that type of anguish into people's lives. There really is no other explanation for somebody going on a frenzy here in America and deciding to pick up a gun and start shooting a bunch of innocent people that they don't know. The only reason in behind that is that they are either nuttier than a fruitcake, or they are deliberately wanting to instill harm, hurt, and pain up into innocent people's lives. There is no other reason other than that. Well, is it possible that they could be bewitched? Is it possible that they could be under some sort of a hypnotic spiritual influence? The same as the people was under that same type of hypnotic influence whenever they crucified Christ, in saying, away with him, away with him, away with him. And there wasn't but very few people that recognized the things of what they was doing to Jesus Christ was in fact wrong. Let's say there was 1,000 people there that day that was involved in the courts, the Sadducees, the Philistines, all the other people, the Jews, the Greeks. Let's say there was 1,000 people, give or take. Out of those 1,000 people, you was lucky if you had probably less than 50 out of those 1,000 people that actually thought that it may actually be to their consciousness to the fact that what they're doing is wrong, other than Joseph and Mary and Jesus' disciples. There may have been 50 people out of that 1,000. So if you rank that down into the right category, that's basically less than about 2% out of the 1,000 that was conscious of the fact that what they was doing was wrong. And the rest of the 950 people was basically the people that was bamboozled in convincing that what they was doing was in fact the right thing. The same thing happened over here in America again and again and again. Whenever they was doing public executions towards hanging people, you'd take a whole town that they would take bits and pieces of a little bit of the truth and bend it and sway it and turn it and twist it to the point that they thought that what they was doing was in fact the right thing. And God only knows how many people died during those exchanged so-called court appearances over here in America that died a unjustifiable death. Why? Because a group of people was under the hypnotic spell of being bewitched, and they thought that in which what they was engaged up in was in fact the proper and right thing to be doing. That's the only other explanation that I can give about how that those guards that worked for Hitler, seeing all that suffering and then driving them people off into them gas chambers, that's the only practical reason that I can think of is why they was doing what they was doing, is that either they enjoyed doing what they was doing, or they had been brainwashed or blinded in believing that what that they was doing was in fact the right thing. And I can't see where they would see that, but you know, I wasn't living back then. You wasn't living back then. None of us was living back then. So there really ain't no way of living in them people's shoes. But what we can do is try to picture ourselves being in that situation, being brought up in that situation, and trying to figure out toward just exactly what did occur when it occurred. And that to me is the only practical reason why that those people done what they was ordered to do towards killing over 6 million Jews. 6 million Jews. Horrible. Thanks again for watching. Good luck to each and every one of us. Good luck to America. God bless America. God bless our troops. And as we end again and again and again by saying, may heaven help us all, and shalom.